The Fallout set is right around the corner, and even though this is a constructed focus channel, it doesn't mean I can't get excited for EDH things. For those viewers of the channel, you may already know that I'm really excited for the Wise Mothman specifically, a card that I think takes a really interesting twist on the mill archetype in EDH and provides a really good spread of colors in terms of what you can do with counters and milling and just taking advantage of your opponent's graveyards and their mishaps. Let's read out the card and just kind of walk through why I'm excited, and then later in the video we're going to walk through maybe a 4-step plan as to how I'm generally going to want to build this archetype out, and generally we can just build some hype for this archetype itself. Again, if you want to see more EDH content like this, let me know in the comment section down below, leave a like on the video, and of course, again, this isn't a shift. This is just me being excited about some EDH content. So I hope you'll join me for this ride as we talk about the Wise Mothman. 1 black, green, and blue for a 3/3 legendary creature, insect mutant with flying. Whenever the Wise Mothman enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. And then whenever 1 or more non-land cards are put into the graveyard, or milled, I should say, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to X target creatures. So specifically, it's not when it enters the graveyard, it has to be milled specifically. So you put a 1/1 counter of up to each X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So for example, if you were to cast maybe a Glimpse the Unthinkable on an opponent and they were to mill 3 non-land permanents, you would put a 1/1 counter onto 3 creatures. You wouldn't put 3 1/1 counters on a 1 creature. You'd put you'd put a 1/1 counter onto 3 target creatures. Now those creatures could be your opponent's creatures, they could be your creatures. For whatever reason, if it's your opponent's creatures, I don't know. That can matter there. The rad counters themselves are also really interesting. So remember that this is a counter that you give to your opponent. So pretend like you are an opponent reading this. So at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, if you have any rad counters, mill that many cards, and then for each non-land card milled this way, you lose 1 life and you lose a rad counter. So you do kind of get rid of those counters over time, so you have to find ways to replenish those counters for your opponents and for yourself. They are going to be losing life, which is fantastic synergies for certain mill cards out there, and then the counters themselves being in blue, being in black. I think you can find ways to put more counters on those historically with maybe some proliferate mechanics. So let's talk about some cards that I think are going to be really interesting in this deck. And we're not going to talk about like those super niche fun interactions, maybe for another video. But firstly, the card that I want to talk about is Seed Time. Now, because you're not playing red, you don't have a plethora of ways to create extra combat. And I specifically want to mention Seed Time because it's kind of like a meme of a card. I did a short about it and a lot of you really liked it. So I'm bringing it up here just because, you know, you take an extra turn after this one. You don't need to play this card, right? But you can play other extra turn spells to kind of enable extra combats for your Mothman. And that's going to be a great way to trigger putting more rad counters onto things, because you need to kind of bulk up on these rad counters. You need to mill your opponent aggressively, and there's other ways to do it. So first and foremost, you play your Mothman, you create other combats, you create more extra turns so that you can swing more, maybe flicker more, you know, because there's when it enters the battlefield as well. But Seed Time is a great example of that. Maybe you play a big game-winning spell and then they play a blue spell, and then you're going to be able to get an extra turn and then do that again. So great card that I might actually meme out in this deck. But another card, kind of phase 2 of this plan, is going to be Ripples of Potential. Blue and 1 for an instant that says proliferate, then choose any number of permanents you control that have a counter put on them this way. Those permanents phase out. So what's really cool about this is, so you're going to proliferate your opponent's rad counters, right? So you're going to do all that. And then your stuff, generally, you're going to mill, right? And you're going to put 1/1 counters on all your creatures. Those are all going to phase out. Maybe you have even counters on your lands. Those lands are going to phase out as well. So this is going to be a great way to take advantage of stuff like Gemstone Caverns and stuff like that to phase those out, or just have more mana coming out of those lands themselves. So Ripples of Potential is just kind of exemplifying that proliferate that you're going to take advantage of in blue, so that you can put counters on things again. You can protect your own stuff. This is a great way to take advantage of 1/1 counters entering, and your creatures are just going to get bigger and bigger. So if you have cards that, you know, your opponents mill more cards when they deal damage, there's cards like out there, then Ripples of Potential is going to be a great way to take advantage of that. The next phase of the plan is going to come down to something like Sepulchral Primordial. It's a card that I think is criminally underplayed, but I think in lower power tables, maybe like 6 or below, it's maybe more played. But when so Sepulchral Primordial, 5 black for a 5/4 creature avatar with Intimidate. When Sepulchral Primordial enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you may put up to 1 target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. I don't think enough mill decks actually take advantage of Reanimation. And I think it's a complete mistake, because at the end of the day, milling out your entire table is actually really hard to do without any type of combo. A lot of mill spells these days are built to target one player, and in more recent years, something like Tasha's Hideous Laughter or Fractured Sanity, you're going to see cards that say each opponent. So obviously this is evolving as Magic goes on, but Sepulchral Primordial is going to be a great way to just take creatures that your opponents have, big green things, hasty red things, and hey, if they're playing extra combat, that's going to be a great thing to steal from them to enable your Wise Mothman as well. Play your reanimation spells, because you already, like, you're always going to need alternate win cons, and because they're losing life, honestly, stealing like big dumb creatures is going to be a fantastic way to just beat someone out in the air, and then maybe you can focus down 1 to 2 players to just mill them out that way. Use your reanimation spells, use your opponent's graveyards, use your own graveyard. Sepulchral Primordial doesn't do that, but use your own graveyard. Maybe you mill yourself over, you mill this over, then you reanimate the Primordial, and then you reanimate 3 more things. It's going to be a fun time to use with the Wise Mothman. Now, the last part of this plan is going to be finding that alt win con. Simic Ascendancy. And I named this card specifically. There are other ways that you could do this. You could opt not to do this, of course, but I find this really fun to do in the sense that this is something that can win out of nowhere. This is a card that you don't even need to have necessarily multiple pieces to win with, unlike many other Simic Ascendancy decks, where you might play this and then you're already going to be milling over a bunch of cards with an attack, with a Giant Glimpse the Unthinkable, and then you're going to be putting a bunch of 1/1 counters on your creatures. Let me just read the card. It's green and blue for an enchantment, and then it has 1 green blue as an activated ability on the enchantment. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Then whenever, and then these are static abilities after that. Whenever 1 or more 1/1 counters are put onto a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. So this is much better with the Mothman, where if you mill over a bunch of non-land permanents, you're going to put a bunch of 1/1 counters on individual creatures. So this is going to trigger multiple times. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, if Simic Ascendancy has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. Now you can imagine where you have the Mothman, then you have Simic Ascendancy, and then you put a bunch of rad counters on people. You can imagine how one rotation of the table, Simic Ascendancy gets absolutely insane, close to winning, if not winning you the game. So going along the lines of having alternative win cons, going through combat, milling your opponent out, or just something like Simic Ascendancy to take advantage of the proliferate mechanic, or just other things that you're doing in terms of putting counters onto creatures. I think the alternative win cons and the multifaceted aspect of the deck is really powerful, because heck, if your opponent's playing shuffle effects, it doesn't matter. You may not even be looking to mill your opponent out. You could just be reanimating this stuff. You could be going off with Simic Ascendancy. You could be making a giant board. And I think that's what's really ultimately powerful about this Mothman deck. There's so many angles to take, and that's why it's so powerful in these colors specifically. Definitely one of the most powerful 3-color combinations out there in terms of what it can do for card draw, reanimation, advantage, and just pure disruption and like nonsense in general in the EDH format. I am really excited for the Mothman to come out in this format and just build around it in general. Let me know in the comment section down below. Are you excited for the Wise Mothman at all? Or what Fallout card are you most excited for that's been revealed so far? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. And of course, as I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to see more EDH content, I'd love to hear that in the comment section down below. Let me know what you want me to talk about. Maybe it's more about the mill archetype, how to play it, some of the best mill cards in the format. I'd love to bring that to you and give y'all some ideas for playing mill in EDH.